the thing that we're really animate about is that if a kid can't afford or his family can't afford to play, we find a way to get them on the ice. And it's super important because, especially in a city like this, and especially depending on where the kid lives, because there are kids that live in this city that, they live on the Upper West Side, they never have to worry about money. But there are kids that would never be able to afford hockey. And having access to that and seeing those kind of like wonderful stories, like Jason McCrimmon in Detroit, and he won the Willie O'Ree Award last year from the NHL, and for what he did for Detroit, and that happens in every major city in the states, and in Canada. That that's how we got to grow this sport, and the cities that have had NHL teams kind of fall away is because they didn't pull it from the ground up.
Thanks for checking out this week's episode of People Are the Answer. I truly believe that people are the only answer to the world's many problems. I'm Jeffrey M. Zucker, a serial entrepreneur, here to learn how innovators are creating outsized, transformational social impact and to shine a light on all the good happening in a world often hyper-focused on the negative. Today's episode features Steve Mosier, a highly experienced designer in various mediums and hockey coach of over 2 decades. Steve has worked with a variety of Fortune 500 companies, and these days, through his role at SY Partners, helps companies looking to create transformational change in their organizations. He's also a hockey fanatic who has been coaching youth hockey for 23 years. Steve has always had a passion for bringing the hockey community together, which culminated in his podcast, Ice Pass, which examines the rich connections hockey creates. Steve and I discuss his hardworking upbringing in Michigan as a prolific art student, how he got into hockey, his move east in 2000, his hockey story, starting his podcast, and much more. Here is Steve Mosier on People Are the Answer. Steve, thanks so much for joining me on People Are the Answer.
Of course, I'm very excited to be on here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you and to get to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is hockey. And we'll dig into that shortly. But I'd love to just start off with understanding what motivates you in life.
Well, I've always been kind of a creative. I grew up in a creative family. My dad's a musician. My mother was a bit of a singer and a drawer. Um, my dad always drew and did models and made us kind of do and models and be creative and things like that. So my sister is like a scrapbooker, and she's really into interior decorating and things. So it's kind of been always kind of part of that. Sports was kind of the thing that just kept us active outside of being at home and drawing. So yeah, being a designer was kind of way before I even thought about hockey.
Very cool. It's cool to hear how you had sort of that art foundation in your family. And where was that? Where did you grow up, and what was it like there?
I grew up in Waterford, Michigan, which is about 30 miles north of Detroit at the edge of the Detroit metropolitan area. A lot of people will say, to make it simple, I'm from Detroit. And I like to say specifically the town I'm from and where it's at, because not many suburban people can say they're from Detroit. Detroit's a very unique city. So, um, but yeah, no, it was great. And I had me and my sister, even my mom. There's kind of a cool creative story to that my high school teacher, Mrs. Lee, Sheila Lee, she taught my mother, my sister, and myself. She was very young when she taught my mom. Um, she still was vivacious and young when she taught my sister, but a little bit older. And she really helped me kind of push myself into my family. They're very blue collar. They're very, you know, barely out of high school types. They didn't really know anything about college. My sister had went to a couple changed majors a couple times, and then my talent in high school for painting and design kind of showed up. So she really helped me get a really good scholarship, and I was winning silver and gold keys in high school. I was the president of our National Art Honor Society. Um, I was I was out of all my friends that were athletic, I was the one that was like a bit of the weirdo. Um, painting, designing. I had a cable station. I had a cable show in my junior and senior years. I
Wow.
thought I would go to broadcasting because the blue collar in me was like, I can't make money painting. But I got a really great scholarship at College for Creative Studies, which is now, it was called Center for Creative Studies. Now it's called College for Creative Studies. So it's much larger now.
Got it. And where was that?
That's in right in downtown Detroit behind the Detroit Institute of Arts. Um, it was kind of nice because we had great access to the museum. We had Detroit Public Library was right there. The building we were in was these massive, beautiful, kind of large apartments. They weren't like the normal dormitory apartments that my friends were getting at, U of M or Michigan State. They'd come to visit me, and they're like, and I could probably had enough floor space if people brought enough, sleeping bags or something to have like 10 or 15 people in my apartment. So, but we were building all kinds of weird stuff, so we needed the room.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I really like that sort of art foundation that you've mentioned, and hearing how you thrived with it in high school, and then that took you on to school from there. And I want to dig in a little more to that, but just briefly, what's your current role and focus?
The company I work at is called SY Partners. It's a transformation consultancy, which isn't entirely clear of what it is, but we work with Fortune 500 leadership on anything from, you know, D and I. We're working on doing some sustainability with companies. Usually, it's kind of based around a new CEO or a new leader that kind of wants to shake things up and share their voice to the rest of the employees. So
Yeah,
we do a lot of that. A lot of and I manage my we have two factions of design at SYP. We have our design team, but we also have our studio design team, and studio design team is all we call ourselves makers. So we kind of, I can design a book, but I can actually sew a book. I can build it. Um,
very cool.
so we like to get our hands dirty if we can.
That sounds awesome. It sounds like a role where you get to be very creative and thoughtful. And the idea of getting sort of a front row seat to these major transformations at big companies has got to give you some good perspective.
For sure. And actually, one of our biggest ones that we kind of have, there's been press about it and things like that because a lot of the work we work on is internal for these companies. So some of it's a bit hush hush, but we did some work with Pfizer just before they got a brand new CEO, Albert Morla, and you know we know it was so funny because we were talking to Pfizer about how they can how they can maybe change one disease, and then because of our help kind of getting them to think a little differently, um, then they had the vaccine during COVID, and now they're talking about changing the world. So for them to be able to step up like that was pretty amazing to watch and be
Yeah.
part of.
Wow. That's very interesting. And I'm sure it was a whirlwind time.
It sure was. But as long as we make kind of nice designs and we do what we really think thoughtfully here, in a lot of 4D ways. I've used everything from scented oils to, we really try to make it a really special experience for these leaders. We're not just trying to put a few posters up in a in a dingy conference room. We really want to change the experience. So we're very good at kind of really like thinking thoughtfully instead of kind of like, oh, well, you want a couple posters? Cool. We'll make a deck for you to look at.
Right.
And that is a bit of what we do, but usually we like to try to take it a little further.
Yeah. I mean, I like that hands-on approach, really, you can show a deck with new ideas, but if you can't really feel it around you, it's not going to necessarily have a huge impact.
Yeah, and I mean, we think, there's meditations we've done. There's a lot of like things that kind of take them out of the box a little bit. They make them think a little differently. And it's always worked for the things that we've done. It tends to kind of shake things up a little bit, which is good.
So it sounds like you're getting to do some really cool stuff in your design career. Can you sort of walk me through that cool education you got in Detroit to where you got to now and what sort of brought you there?
It's funny because I know we're gonna talk about hockey as well, but as a kid, in high school and things like that, learning to be creative was all kind of geared around my interests, which were, you know, at MIT, when I was in junior high is when I really started getting into hockey. I grew up playing baseball. I really liked, Star Wars and kind of nerdy, comics and Mutant Ninja Turtles and stuff like that. And when I was a kid, I was drawing all of that. And then when I was in high school, I started designing things for that. They're like, "Oh, Steve, you should make the logo for the rink you play at or something." And then in college, that became when I started working on branding and my first approaches at thinking about design and branding. Of course, I was, redesigning Bauer skates
Yeah.
and trying to find photos of Gordie Howe. And it was interesting back then because I was also in college from '96 to 2000. It was kind of the beginning of the internet,
Yeah.
so it wasn't like now where you can just go grab and all these like visual references.
Yeah.
So we had
Wow.
to draw a lot of it.
Yeah.
So
That's really cool to hear, and from my perspective, one of the many things I've wanted to be when I was growing up, was a graphic designer. My aunt's a graphic designer and was always an inspiration to me. And I just remember in school drawing like all the hockey players, drawing all the logos of the NHL teams, the ECHL teams. And like I remember when I got to middle school and we started I had an art class where we got to paint, and my teacher was awesome and let me paint hockey players and stuff like that. And my favorite one is I painted Ray Bork lifting the cup, and so I love how your passions in other areas can play into your art.
I actually, there's a funny story about that kind of almost blockaded my creativity. Was I had a teacher in junior high, and we had these like little copper pieces of copper plated things that you kind of use a little pen and kind of draw on it. Well, I drew Bart Simpson, and at the time, for teachers, Bart Simpson was like you know the bad kid, and so of course I drew Bart Simpson, and she literally told my parents that I'll never have any. She thinks she said he's not creative and he'll never have a future in art.
Oh
And
my god, what a horrible thing to say, even
yeah,
if you think it's true.
I mean, I I don't even remember her name. I think it was
Yeah,
Mrs. something. I'm not going to use her last name,
yeah, yeah,
um, but also I don't know if she's still alive or if she still lives in Michigan or something. I'd love to send her a letter about what I do now and the career that I've had from designing books and working for major museums like Museum of Modern Art. I worked there for a while. I worked for Phillips Tapiri and Company for a long time, which now it's just called Phillips, which is an auction house. I worked on the Nasdaq market site. Worked for Ford for a while. So yeah, I think I had a bit of a creative bone in there.
yeah. That's funny how like Bart Simpson was probably like the big catalyst for her being like, this is a bad kid.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah. Well, it's really, yeah. I mean, I tend to love that sort of beating expectations of someone's story. So, yeah, if she's still out there, hopefully she happens upon the podcast.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, and it's so funny because Bart Simpson was like one of those characters when I was a kid. I used to get kind of bullied before I, started playing hockey. And Bart Simpson was kind of like, the kid that was like, you know, shooting, little rocks at his friends and the other kids in school and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, I like Bart Simpson. He was a bit of a tough guy. So,
Yep.
and then when I
Yeah,
signed up for
absolutely.
hockey, it was like that changed everything.
Yeah, I mean, Bart played hockey.
Yep. Yeah.
Uh,
Against there, I mean, with I don't know if does the Simpsons have Colorado Avalanche? I know South
South
Park
Park,
did.
yeah. I don't remember which was in the episodes of Simpsons. I don't think so,
Yeah.
but yeah. So I mean, in terms of hockey, you're a very experienced designer in a variety of mediums. It sounds like by day. but hockey is a huge passion for you, as it is for me. Tell me about, you mentioned first getting engaged in hockey around middle school. So just tell me about your history with the game.
It was funny because in Detroit's kind of, you know, because when I was 6 years old, the Detroit Tigers won the World Series, and I thought that was huge. And then the Pistons won back-to-back championships. So I was playing basketball. I mean, I played baseball until my sophomore year of high school, but I never played basketball, even though more in the neighborhood or whatever. Then it was like a perfect storm that all the Russian players came to the Red Wings, and the Red Wings became really good in the early 90s, and so it became a big thing in and around Detroit that the Red Wings were on the up. But also what was happening, and I find it interesting, is that training for hockey off the ice was starting to become a thing.
Mm,
Inline skates showed up,
yep.
and it wasn't just like playing gym hockey, in your gym class, that you'd bend the sticks and hope that you didn't get smacked between the eyes
Yep.
by the little rubber puck or something. But that kind of switch happened, and then I told my parents, I'm like, I really want to learn how to ice skate. Well, my dad's friend, Mike, that he worked at the shop with at General Motors, knew how to skate. So of course, he had a son as well, got to learn how to skate at the Flint IMA, which is where the Flint Generals used to play, but now
Yeah.
the Flint, I think they're called the Thunderbirds or Firebirds play.
Firebirds. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of like the beginning of it. And then I told my dad I want to sign up. And at the time, because of the gear and everything else, it was expensive.
Yeah. I
And
mean, it
my
still
dad was,
is.
yeah. I mean, it was funny though, because now it's in New York City it's thousands of dollars, and
Right.
skates are $1,100, sticks are $400. It's uh it's ridiculous. But back then, my dad was always my dad was always supportive, and he was at every practice, at every game. He was really great in that way. But he also was like, if you want to do this, you got to help. So I would do like lawn, I used to mow lawns, or I was a paper route. I had a paper route when I was a kid. So I would have, if I could give him half, and he would pay the other half, I could play.
That's awesome. I'm sure that instilled that at work ethic in you as a kid.
For sure, for sure. And then it also kind of created this, um, you know, I wasn't gonna step away from it. I have kids now in this new kind of generation of kids that just be like, I don't want to be at practice, or I don't want to tell coach I'm going to show up or something. And I would never do that. Always wanted to be there. If I could be on the ice 6 hours a day, I would. But also, thanks to global warming, I used to do that because I used to be. I live near a lake, so I used to go to do my paper route and then go down to the lake and skate all day. My dad would bring me lunch and some hot cocoa, and then later in the afternoon, as the sun would go down, I could hear my mom. My mom had a crazy whistle, and it was like two or three football fields away. And when I heard that whistle, I knew I was late. So, so late for dinner. If I wanted to eat, I had to get there. So,
That's
um,
awesome.
yeah, that was kind of my first kind of in for hockey. And then when my dad decided to sign me up, there was a 2-year wait. So
Wow.
I kept playing, inline, and kept playing at the lake, and kept playing and getting into an old friend of mine, Danny Kraus, also was kind of just getting into hockey. There was a lot of kids in the '90s that were new
Yeah.
to it, and I got to go on in his practices and kind of shoot on the goalie because they needed kind of just someone to warm up the goalie. And I was like, sure, I'll do it. So I was actually hypothetically a coach before I was a player.
Love that. And that carried on as you continue to coach. And yeah, I mean, I know that coaching hockey, just volunteering around hockey in general, is a big part of your life. Um, so I'd like to maybe start by telling me how you got into that, and also what brought you to the East Coast.
Um, after school, I was in a relationship in school. The first girl I met in the elevator, and she happened to be going to school for photography. And at the time, and it still is kind of a big thing here in New York, but at around 2000, like if you wanted to be a photographer, you had to go to New York. So of course she wanted to come to New York, and I'm like, okay, I'll come with you.
Yeah.
I spent a little time in the Netherlands before that because I did my internship for design in the Netherlands. But yeah, we moved to New York. We had a moment in 2004 where her and I were like, we got to get out of here. It's just too dirty, or it's this, or all the stuff that everybody would think about in New York. And then we moved away for a year, and then moved back. Our relationship kind of separated, and then she moved back to Texas, and I stayed here ever since.
Yeah, wow. And I failed to mention you were to go back briefly to Detroit. You were in college when the Wings won those back-to-back cups in 97, 98. Well, was that a party? How was that?
It was good just because I wasn't downtown in the summers. In the summers, I was actually it was funny because I got to watch a lot of the games and I got to go through the experience of the Red Wings winning. But those 2 summers, I was actually working at General Motors because they had a deal back then where they couldn't, because of the unions and things, they couldn't hire. So what they did is they said, oh well, all these people have kids in college. Why don't we just have them come and kind of fill in while people are on vacation through the summer? So I was actually putting windshields in cars, but I'd have
Oh,
to
wow.
wake up at like 4 a.m. with my dad. So if there was any type, since they played Colorado or played out west or something like that, because they were in the Western Conference,
Mm.
sometimes the games were a little late. So I kept my nose and eyes to it, but not as much as I would have liked to.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's that's tough, that's life. And I mean, I certainly appreciate, and I know it comes through in your character, all this hard work that you've had to put in over the years to get where you are. And it comes through in stories like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just I love the sport so much, and it's funny because it's one of those. I really call it a relationship because it's grown. Like when I was a kid, I really loved it and I wanted to play all the time. When I was in college, I went to art school. There was not very many sports programs, but I still tried to play as much as possible. One of my best friends out in San Diego that I went to school with, he and him and I would go play at like 11 or 12 at night and try to find open hockey somewhere, try to find beer league somewhere. I'd play it when I was working at GM. I would only sign up for beer leagues on Friday nights so I could at least make it to games. Um, Even though the beer league I played in had Joe Kosar and Ed Belfour, which was a little
Wow.
tough, difficult. Ed Belfour played right wing though, so but he
Okay,
was
okay.
fast. He was fast,
That would have
and
been cool to see him skate out, I'm sure.
it was something. But it was like right in that time before they won the cup in '97, the Red Wings. So because like any kid, once you are like 17, all you want to do is play beer league. You want to take the neck guard off. You want to wear a half shield. You want to take the big cage off. You're like, I want to play beer league with all the grown ups. And then you start to play with full size men, and you realize it's a whole different ball of wax.
Yep. Exactly. Um, well, that sounds fun. It's always cool to hear how hockey, kind of keeps people going and sort of the efforts you have to do to stay in the game. Matt, you mentioned it sounded like around 2000 moving to New York. So were you in New York on 9/11?
I actually was on in New York on 9/11. The girl that I was seeing at the time, she was actually working for a photographer up in Maine, so I was by myself. And of course, at the time, my cell phone was a flip open phone. So, and I was working from home a lot. I was doing a lot of freelance design, and my phone was going off, and I'm like, "Oh, what is this all about?" And I was kind of, I'm still a hard sleeper, and people that know me know that very well, that I have to have like, alarms from everywhere going off to wake up. But the thing that was pretty prolific in that day was that I lived in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, that had a little bridge, which is known, I think it's called the Pulaski Bridge. That might be right, I hope. But it's the halfway point of the New York Marathon. And I could feel my phone going off, but I was just like, it's probably my mom or something, whatever. I'll call her later. And it actually was my mom, or it was my sister, I think. But I started hearing people screaming because my
Wow.
windows were open because it was September. So, and I look out my window and people are literally just like gasping and watching everything because my building faced the bridge, but
Mm.
around I had like an outdoor space on like an outdoor patio, and outside I could see the building. So I didn't see the first tower go down, but I did see the second one go down, and I have photos of it that I
Wow.
took that I keep in a safe. It's a very interesting thing in New York when it comes to 9/11 because everyone's got a different story, and I think even if you weren't in New York, you have such a different story about that. So it's that most impactful of days. So it's the thing that was the wildest part about it was the week after because you walk around the city and it was just I've never seen New York City beat up. That's the easiest way to put it. Like everybody was just like kind of shell shocked.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine, and just, like you said, everyone has their story where they were, etc. But just being right there has just got to make it that much more real.
It was also interesting for the fact that since cell service was kind of starting, the thing that happened that day because it didn't have now there's cell towers all over the city to kind of boost the the cell service, and back then that didn't really happen. So every like not only was my phone going off, but it wasn't really going off. People were trying to get a hold of me. A lot of my friends in Michigan knew I lived in New York City. Some people don't know the geography of the city, so they didn't realize that I was actually pretty far away from where things were going down. So it was a lot of like answering phone calls, answering emails, just telling people I'm okay. You know, Facebook had just started, so that kind of helped and saved the situation. So there was a little bit of ways of getting around. I don't even know. Maybe MySpace was still there. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I think you might. I think MySpace and Facebook may have been after that.
Yeah, I think well, yeah. I'm trying. It was that
Because
day
I
was
was
like
in eighth grade, and I think I remember having MySpace like 10th grade, ninth or 10th grade, maybe.
okay,
So
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it was around.
Well, at this point, social media feels like it's been around forever. So yeah, it's hard to kind of chronologically dig into it.
Did that, being that close to that event, did it change anything you did from there? Like, was it just, something a part of history that you got to sort of see front row seat, or did it change the way you operated, or?
No, it was just more about something that I got to see. The thing that's great about it is not only it was a thing that I saw, but it's also because right now, and I think about how people are and they're stuck to their phones and they don't pay attention to anybody, and empathy is talked about so much because it's not used at all. um there's been things that I've seen and heard in articles that are like, you know before the cell phones, people would walk around and not run into you, and now people just run into you and things. And after 9/11, that year really showed, and that day even showed really how much, when you walk around New York City now, you're just like, everyone looks mad. And that is kind of the normalcy that everyone would think of in New York City. But that day, it was really, everyone came together, everyone really supported each other. Um, Everyone cried on everyone's shoulders. Yeah, and it was definitely around the country.
If you're enjoying this episode, I would greatly appreciate if you could review, like, comment, or subscribe on your favorite platforms. Your engaged support goes a long way in helping the show grow and getting our impactful guests heard. Now back to the show. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it was too tenfold in New York, but just to remember how people came together, was at least some honor on the horror that happened and the people that passed. Um, and it's been sad to see, like COVID and more recent history. I was hoping people would come together in that way. It didn't happen, but um, yeah, I mean, so what a crazy piece of history to be around for. And we'll move on from that, though. You have been in New York since, and tell me about, getting involved in the local hockey community. For me, I've found, and I've moved a few times, and it's always kind of hard to get back into the hockey community, at least for me. Like, Charleston, where I grew up, it's basically there's one rink, the whole hockey community lives at it. You're part of it from the beginning. It's easy. When I lived in Chicago, I tried playing for different beer league teams, was never really found my fit. So like I never really got into a groove, didn't play a ton for my years there. Fortunately in Denver, was
Well, and you
able
get a few
to
different choices
find a
in
good
Denver
sort
for
of
sure.
home in the hockey community. And so I'm
Right.
right, like Charleston, it's one rink. Denver, there's like 11 rinks in the area. So it's definitely a little bit different. And I'm
Well,
curious,
what's
how that
intriguing,
transition was for you
not
coming
to
from,
go too
being in
far off
Michigan your whole life.
of what you just mentioned, what's intriguing is I first started when I first came here and I was like looking for hockey. There was only really one rink, and it was Chelsea Piers, and Chelsea Piers has Sky Rink. But when I started, that was like the new Sky Rink, so it was shiny and glossy and beautiful and new. And it still is, compared to some other rinks. But at the time, it was the only one. There was that, and there was an outdoor rink. There were two outdoor rinks. There was Lasker, that's in Central Park, which they're going to renovate and redo eventually. And there was Riverbank, which is an outdoor space, do eventually. And there was Riverbank, which is an outdoor space. Now they have, back when I first started skating at Riverbank, there was this, you had to switch halfway through the skate because it was again right on the river, and it was above like a sewage facility plant or something.
Okay.
So what would happen is if the side you were on, you would just get like wind blown. So you'd have to switch just to make it sort of even between the teams. But the skate that my first skate I ever had, and I used to come all the way from Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, all the way up to Harlem. Which, if anyone's listening to this, that is not close. It took me like 2.5 hours on the train
Wow.
to get there,
That's the
and
dedication of a hockey player.
yeah, but I was skating with Canner Fitzgerald, who the skate ended because of 9/11,
Mm,
because a lot of the guys that skated that skate passed
wow.
tragically in 9/11. But then those things came back, and we had skates and memories for those guys after and things like that. So that kind of showed, you know, speaking of 9/11, kind of the heart of the hockey community in New York. That moment of Mark Messier wearing the fireman's helmet. Um, Still, they have the FDNY versus NYPD every year, and that raises a lot of money for families affected by 9/11. Even though the firefighters and the cops just don't seem to like each other.
They just beat the shit out of each other.
Pretty much, and it's not. That was a more. I think there's like a documentary I think that Spit and Chicklets put together. That was like 10 years ago. They got in a fight, and ever since then, it's it's not. They're not nice to each other. So, but it's a great game to watch, and it's a great thing to see. But as far as like, um, when I finally got to Skyrink, there was only 3 divisions. Now there's 8 plus actually. There's like 9 or 10, and each division has at least 8 to 10 teams, if not more. And some of the divisions, there's an A and a B division. So that just goes to show you 7 days a week at Skyrink there is adult hockey. And then over the years, Aviator opened up down in Brooklyn. Abe Stark was opened, but it was going through different ownerships. City Ice in Long Island City, Queens opened up. So there is about 5 different rinks, but they're very spread out in the framework of getting around a major city.
And at what point in when you started playing there did you start volunteering and coaching?
Um, I like any young hockey player, I wasn't making very much money yet. I was living in New York City, so of course my money was just going to rent. So I was coming up with new solutions, and I started noticing even in my rinks in Michigan that my friends were working at the pro shop, or they were helping out um, coach and things like that, and they were actually getting paid for it. So I was like, yeah, I could do that. So I signed up for the pro shop and learned how to sharpen skates. And only on Saturdays, because that was the only day I could do it. Because my Monday through Friday job wouldn't let me get away and sharpen skates. But when I saw that, I started seeing coaching. And at first, the coaching was volunteer. And I'm like, I was intrigued by it. So I wanted, and I had, like I said, I had started with coaching in a way. So I got my USA hockey certification and started coaching as an assistant for a couple groups and then kind of worked my way up. And I've been at Skyrink since I want to say 2001, with the exception of I lived that 1 year in Texas, so I didn't coach there.
Yeah. I mean, wow, that's quite the run. So you must be a fixture in the community there.
Yeah, I was actually talking to someone the other day about this. I would never say I'm the king of Skyrink, never. But I'm pretty proud of the fact that a lot of factions, whether it's youth hockey there, whether it's adult hockey there, at all in different divisions, um, they've gotten to know me. The podcast has kind of connected that because some of the people are listening to the podcast now in all the different divisions. I've got posters for the podcast, around the arena. So they kind of come at me that way. And then on top of that, the best part about it, like the number one part about it that just warms my heart every time. And the kids joke because when I'm coaching, I don't think the word warm my heart would ever warm up, would ever seem like that's how I'm doing things. But I usually keep track of the kids, like the kids that I really think are going to be, I always tell them at the beginning of the season, I'm like, I'm going to make a hockey addict out of your son or daughter. And the parents are kind of like, what's that mean? And the whole thing is, I'm like, I want to find two or three kids that I coach, and I want to talk to them in their 30s and see,
Yeah.
you know, and there are a lot of kids that I wrote recommendation letters for their college. Um, I still keep track of them. I don't let them get on my social media until they're of age.
Yeah, that's
Um,
good.
and then, I always ask them like, what school you going to? What do you want to do? Do you ever think about coaching? Um, I'm I'm kind of the biggest thing that makes me proud is that I really like to push the sport forward a bit because I know I'm going to coach kids that are probably never going to play. There's a lot of those, but there's a lot of kids that never stop,
Right.
and they're just as crazy and addicted to it as I am.
And I mean, you've been doing it for over 20 years. So, are there any of those sort of former athletes that you've worked with that you've been really impressed by or proud of?
There's a kid, Joe Fusco. I'll say his name because he likes when I talk about him a bit. But he's a very talented photographer, plays all the time. He coaches, um, and seeing how and he's got season tickets to the Rangers, constantly posting about that. So you know he's really into it. I have a kid that Jacob Lasner that works in radio at BC at Boston College, and he does he actually
I'm a
yeah
BU guy.
I know but you know he turned his love of hockey into broadcasting. So
Awesome.
um and then I got the other kids that maybe they don't do it for a living or something, but they play 3 or 4 nights a week
Yep. Yeah.
until they get married and their wives tell them otherwise.
Yeah. Hopefully they have a nice understanding wife like I do that, still lets me get on the ice a couple times a week. Um, So you mentioned briefly your podcast, Cross Ice Pass, and I know when we first met, you came out to really appreciate it to the late game premiere that we had in New Jersey. That was awesome, and then you reached out about Tyner and I being on your podcast, and that is what brought my attention to Cross Ice Pass. And there's plenty of hockey podcasts out there, but what really resonated with me about yours was how you described it. So I have this excerpt from your site, and it's just Cross Ice Pass is more than just about stories for the boys and more about rich connections. It's about how hockey has brought the guests into more significant things in life. So yeah, I mean that just really resonated with me because people that have listened to a lot of these episodes have heard me talk about hockey before, talk about how impactful it's been on my life in just so many ways. Like we all know, I mean, hockey players, when you talk, you get it, sort of what you get from being on the team and the camaraderie and just the lessons that you learn. And so to see that you were coming at hockey from that perspective, like, I love NHL podcast as much as the next guy, but to see you coming from this perspective, I thought was interesting and unique, and excited me.
Yeah, and I mean, thank you for that. And I'm glad that resonated because um, my biggest thing was, during COVID, we're all home. I'm listening to Spittin' Chicklets like crazy. I'm listening to old episodes, trying to catch up. And I love Spittin' Chicklets. I love Empty Netters. I love Missing Curfew. I love those guys, but their their audience was really the NHL and people that were fans of the NHL or former players of the NHL. And then there were other podcasts that were more like Beer League. I think there's one that's called Beer Leaguers, um, and that was really like kind of people that didn't know much about the pro experience. And I'm like, why are these things kind of so separated? And then there's also these things, these really wondrous things I get to see in a big city like New York, where you have hockey in Harlem. You have the Riverbank Arena is kind of state run, so the kids can play for a discounted rate. Hockey in Harlem, they get all their gear donated usually. They were connected with the Rangers, now they're connected with the Islanders. So kind of seeing things like that, kind of seeing things, of course, like the NHL, because I've had a couple NHL retired NHL legends, but also talking about how women are really being impactful to changing our game right now, and having those kind of conversations are important. Um, and all the aspects of it. It's kind of why I liked, you know, we love calling things the metaverse. It's like the movie moment right now. So I'm like, no one's ever called it the hockey verse. I'm like, I'm gonna call it that.
I like that. I like
So
that a lot.
it's
It's a tight knit group in the hockeyverse.
yeah, and it's in my life, and I'm sure everyone's had these moments. Like I had a terrible cycling accident about 15 years ago that I got 48 screws kind of keeping my skull together.
Wow.
Um, but the people that were there, obviously my family was there. I was in the hospital for a couple months, but the people that came every day are guys that I played with.
Mm, yeah.
So the guys I played with, their wives, their families would come and visit. So that just kind of shows you the
Yep.
importance of the community. Because in all the other sports I played in, I've never seen that exist like it does in hockey.
Yeah.
Um,
It's really true.
and you have friends that go through things, and you make sure they're okay. I was just a few weeks ago in Meadville, Pennsylvania. Um, a friend um, died kind of suddenly from a heart attack. His brother and my friend Tom Westfall, who played for various Danbury teams, he puts this event together to raise money for the family. And it's just without hockey, I don't think that kind of you know we have like 8 teams that show up. We're in its second year. It's getting bigger, and it's those like raise money and help each other. Hockey players love to help each other, especially if there's a few cold beers involved.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely like a familial sport in many ways, and um, because of that, and um, all the things that it can provide, hockey really has deep impact on people's lives. Is there any time in particular where you've seen it, really change somebody's life? That comes to mind.
The one thing that happens is, because the thing that's great at Skyrink right now, the head of the youth department is Keith Knight, part because we call all our entire youth program as New York Cyclones. And the thing that we're really animate about is that if a kid can't afford, or his family can't afford to play, we find a way to get them on the ice. And it's super important because, especially in a city like this, and especially depending on where the kid lives, because there are kids that live in this city that, they live on the Upper West Side, they never have to worry about money. But there are kids that would never be able to afford hockey. And having access to that and seeing those kind of like wonderful stories, like Jason McCrimmon in Detroit, and he won the Willie O'Ree Award last year from the NHL, and for what he did for Detroit, and that happens in every major city in the states, and in Canada. That's how we got to grow this sport. And The cities that have had NHL teams kind of fall away is because they didn't pull it from the ground up. You
Right,
know,
right.
you think about Arizona, and I mentioned it before. People were kind of hard on Arizona because they're like, "Oh, well, Arizona's got to leave. It's their time to leave." And I'm like, "Yeah, but think about it. Without the Arizona Coyotes, we wouldn't have Austin Matthews.
Yep.
We wouldn't have Tage Thompson. Matthew Kachuk would have grown up somewhere else because his dad played for the Coyotes. So, and Gretzky his move to LA. I always joke about it because there's in a lot of articles Gretzky said he would move. He would have wanted to be a Red Wing if he was going to get
Yeah,
traded.
I remember that.
And his dad's like, you could Detroit already is a hockey town, you know.
Right.
So why don't you go to some place and make it a hockey town? And
Yep.
LA has a really great youth program that is pretty large, and it's not just LA, Anaheim, San Jose, Colorado. I mean, all that stuff. Just one guy. It's all it took
Yep.
was once to once once the proper refrigeration techniques moved south. We tended to have more hockey down there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean 100%. I'm a product of South Carolina, so I can relate. You know, the ECHL coming to South Carolina in 1993 definitely changed my life in many ways.
Yeah, and it's those kind of like big important moves are, the kind of things that I like to try to influx into what I'm doing with Cross Ice Pass, just because you know I could I could sit and talk to fighters all the time, but I want to talk to a fighter that what does he do after, like what has your career been like? What have you really done after your career? And that's really unique. That little touch is really unique to me. Like my talk with Eli Afraidy and of course he's known for the slap shot. He worked like 16 years, 12 years with Warrior Hockey, and then he's been a consultant for other NHL teams as a shooting instructor. And that one moment, that one thing, don't get me wrong, his whole career was he was a fast defenseman, he was a hard shooter his whole life, played in the Olympics, but that one little moment kind of, just like John Scott. John Scott does a lot of things now, and he was known for fighting, but he's really known for that MVP.
Yeah, no, it's really cool to see how that comes together. And um, throughout your time in design and hockey, has there been anybody in particular that's been an impactful mentor for you?
Ooh, that's a good one. There has, it's been interesting because there's been so many different ones that I've seen over the years, and things like that. But my dad is a very quiet father. He's not like he's a funny guy, but he's a pretty quiet father. And he was, when I was a kid, he was working so much, but he would wake up at 3:30 in the morning, 4 in the morning, after driving me in a blizzard to a game at 10 o'clock. you know, and he didn't know a lot about the game, and I was starting to learn. Like every time I was on the ice, I was learning more than he would ever know. But he was always a good listener. He was always a good person to push me forward in the sport. And he's still to this day, you know, once in a while he'll be like, I just want you to know, I'm so proud of how, um, this coaching thing that you do is so impactful, and I don't think you quite understand how much it's really helping these kids that you're working on. And my dad still does that stuff to this day. I still send him texts about things that he's not as big of a hockey guy as I am, but I'll send him like links. I'll be like, Dad, you gotta go to this game, you know, across the state or something. I think you'd love it. I know he won't go, but um, he likes to kind of stay in. I'm kind of his point of contact
Right.
basically when it comes to hockey.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say my dad's a pretty important person to
Yeah,
that.
that's awesome. It's
So
awesome. That support system goes a long way in all things.
yeah, for sure, for sure.
So, aside from family, if we're all to end tomorrow, whatever that means to you, what are you either most grateful for or most proud of?
That's a great question as well. I'm really proud of. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love the design work that I've done over my life and my career. Um, I got to work on a pretty great a book called Outdoor Gallery that sadly the publisher didn't sell enough of them, so they instead of giving them to schools because it would have been great knowledge for kids, they just kind of tore them up. But as far as yeah, just it was a sad moment. But like the thing that really is impactful to me is that I basically work 7 days a week, working Monday through Friday with SY Partners. I coach on the weekends, and um, by Monday, not all the time, but by Monday, sometimes I get really great moments where, you know, the kids, the kids just kind of like light me up and kind of have the right moment. Like Saturday, I coached, and it was kind of a perfect moment. I was on the ice coaching. As I was coaching, two kids that I used to coach were coming to play adult league, um, and then I'm getting changed and everything like that. And I posted a video about how to tape your stick, and then as I'm leaving, the guys I used to play beer league with are coming in because they're playing, and they're like, "Moj, how's it going?" Because all the guys I play hockey with, everyone kind of calls me Moj, or they call me Coach. But like, um, I walked out of there kind of like full, like,
Yeah,
and it was just really great to see that, that kid, those two kids that talked to me when they were on their way to play beer league, probably would never talk to me if I never coached them,
right.
and the kids I coached, in that moment, seemed, I hope, to kind of take a little bit of what I taught them. Um, and then kind of running into people that, I now have seen for 15 to 20 years. So yeah, those kind of days are
Yeah.
pretty impactful.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. And love to hear, the warmth of the community and just yeah, I mean, there's just something about it, especially when you're in it and it feels normal, but then when you get a break out of it for whatever reason, you miss it. And it's kind of like growing up when I, played my last real competitive hockey at 18, like you didn't know how much you were going to miss it. And you, in beer league is awesome, but it's not the same as like being on your travel team growing up, that kind of thing. So, um, yeah, the hockey community is a beautiful thing, and I hope that even people that aren't into hockey, the fact that they can learn about what a great community it is, hopefully, endears them a little more to the sport.
Well, and the community has, when you're a kid, um, and you have that experience, and yes, we miss those moments with the boys in the locker room and all that. And you hear a lot of retired guys that play pro. It's all about the guys, But when you start to play beer league or coach or anything like that, it's it's not like you're getting away from the sport. It's just a different environment. And it's still just as impactful. It's still just as important. Um, this podcast would have never happened if I wasn't a graphic designer, because I had to design logos for it. I got to design T-shirts for it. I got to, learn how. I got to go back to my broadcasting days to learn how to edit again. It's you know, I would love for Cross Ice Pass to, I think over time it's moving in the right direction, and we'll see how it goes. There's some pretty great guests coming, so I'm pretty excited about what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, awesome. So, and how long have you been doing the podcast now?
It is the next episode will be its 28th episode. I started about last September, just before the season started. I thought that would be a smart move. Um, and then I'm gonna my episodes during the playoffs are gonna be round based. So I was like, you know what? It's no reason to rush and bark about, because spitting chicklets does that. That's, the podcast. Yeah, the podcasts I love, I'll let them do their thing. And my biggest thing is that I don't really care about the how many likes I get. I care about the content, and it really, from what I do at SY Partners for leaderships and for organizations, and seeing that is, over the 6 years I've worked here, it's been it's a really added bonus to my hockey life as well, and how I really, you know I'm smarter about strategizing how I
Yeah,
what the guests I get, the things I talk about, and trying to be not being different for, different
Right.
sake, just being
Yep.
different for something that hasn't been used.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. And I have this kind of last big question I ask everybody. If you could snap your fingers and fix one thing in the world, what would it be, and how do you think that change would reverberate?
Hmm. Wow. That's a really fun one. um, I would like for people, if I could snap my fingers and think about the world before there was cell phone service involved, before there was web, before there was the web. Um, I'd love if people could have like a real 24-hour moment where I could snap my fingers and there's no web and there's no cell phone service, and really, somehow people having it, people go nuts, people would jump out windows, but um, I wish people would just kind of remember how the world was before we were so plugged in, um, and you know, seeing the butterflies and walking around a park and actually looking at trees instead of looking at your phone. Um, I would really love if the world can do that in one moment, and if people could also be like, you know what, I need to unplug for a little bit.
Yeah. It's kind of like bringing back mindfulness to the whole.
Yes, because mindfulness was there. It's always been there. It's just now we hear more about it because we're so plugged in. When I was in the '80s, I never thought about meditating, but I probably should have. And now because you're so plugged in and you're so like overwhelmed by whatever comes off this thing, it's it's you definitely need to meditate once in a while.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Well, I hope that our world can find that ability to disconnect at some point. It's hard to imagine, but really appreciate having you here. Appreciate what you do for the hockey community, especially. Would love to push people to check out Cross Ice Podcast. How else can people support you and your impact?
Just kind of jump into Cross Ice Pass on Instagram. It's the thing that's funny is Cross Ice Pass has not been used before, so you can go to crossicepass.com. You can go to Cross Ice Pass NYC on Instagram. You can find me on YouTube platforms, YouTube, Apple, Spotify platforms. I'm connected to the Hockey Podcast Network now, so you can kind of click through that.
Awesome. Yeah, the Late Game Podcast just joined the Hockey Podcast Network as well.
Oh, nice. That's great. No, it's good, and I'm hoping that'll be kind of a new access point. And I'm also, because of that, we're getting it's like a bible of like all these great podcasts that are of our teams of people talking about things that I can learn from.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Steve, thanks so much for your time and your efforts, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks for checking out this episode of People Are the Answer. For more information, go to peoplearetheanswer.com. Please like, subscribe, rate, whatever you can do on various platforms. We really appreciate the support. And if you're interested, check out my other podcast, The Late Game Podcast. You can learn more at thelategame.com. Thanks.